Morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It was in 2012 when I first got in contact with the Incest Trauma Center in Belgrade. At that time, I was head of the Council of Europe mission here in Belgrade, and I sat in this office with these colorful therapy boxes on the shelves, which you also saw in the introductory film. And I was immediately so impressed by the courage, conviction, and ambition of the leaders of the self-organized women NGO. Thank you. Women NGO with this admittedly slightly irritating name. For me, this first meeting marked the beginning of a very intensive cooperation with the Incest Trauma Center on the Council of Europe's 1 in 5 campaign against sexual violence against children, but most remarkably was our common advocacy work for the ratification of the so-called Lanzarote Convention, the Council of Europe Convention on the protection of children against sexual exploitation and sexual violence. The societal conditions for this work were, to put it mildly, at the time not very favorable. I'm not quite sure whether it would be more favorable now, but at that time we thought actually it's pretty grim. Yet the tireless efforts of Dušica and Liliana and their team, and the political support of the then cross-party lines network of women parliamentarians led steadily to the ratification of the Lanzarote Convention in the Serbian parliament, and even with a very sensational result that was also mentioned in the film. As the second European country, Serbia resigned the Statute of Limitation on Sex Offences against children. So I have to say, it is really a great honor for me to speak at the opening session of this international conference organized by your very young European Women's Network Against Sexual Violence. First of all, I would like to congratulate you to the creation of this European network, because for an international and intergovernmental organization like mine, like the Council of Europe, the support of competent NGOs is essential and irreplaceable, because we all know very well that legal documents remain empty shells if they are not implemented and monitored by a critical, well-informed and competent civil society, and also in public administration. The list of participants and speakers of the program of the coming 3 days reads a bit like the who is who in this important field of social policy here in the region. And I'm here today to speak briefly about the connection of social policies against sexual violence and sexual abuse and youth policy. But let me first put my contribution in this institutional context. 2 Council of Europe conventions are groundbreaking when it comes to combating sexual violence. I already mentioned the Lanzarote Convention, which is in force since 2010 and was signed by all of our 47 member states of the Council of Europe. It is and it was the first regional treaty dedicated specifically to the protection of children from sexual violence, and offers, as most of you will know, this 4P approach: prevention of the crime, protection of the victim, prosecution of the offenders, and promotion of national and international cooperation. The other equally groundbreaking and important document is our Istanbul Convention. The Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. It entered into force in 2014 and has been signed by 45 member states, so 2 are missing, and it has also been signed by the European Union. It has been ratified, however, only by 34 member states. That means still 11 need to ratify. Many of you would remember that last year the Istanbul Convention got an awful lot of publicity in Croatia. Despite the partly violent public protest, the convention was ratified by the Croatian parliament in June 2018 because the majority of parliamentarians withstood the manipulations and misinformations and the populist discourse around the content of this convention. We have published a little brochure on some rumors circulating around the Istanbul Convention, which I brought, and you can find it in the back of the room on the publications table. The Istanbul Convention also works on 4 Ps. So the last P is slightly different. So we have prevention, protection, prosecution, but then the Istanbul Convention talks about policies, integrated policies, to offer a holistic approach to violence against women and domestic violence. Now, and this is where actually youth policy also comes in, because as gender policy, children policy, and in fact most of the social policy fields, youth policy is also a transversal and cross-sectional field. Yet there is very little and not enough communication between the sectors, and sometimes it's even worse, we or they or us creating obstacles for each other. This is why I would like today, in my present role as head of the Youth Department of the Council of Europe, introduce 2 more Ps to the discussion. And one is participation, and the other P is power. And I'm happy that the rector of the university also mentioned this word power, because in fact this is a very important element in our field of work. Child protection policies for, sorry, I'm now on the wrong page, that's the wrong page. I would like to share with you one dilemma of my job, which is caused by the absence of an internationally agreed legal definition of what is youth, or what is a young person. In the Council of Europe, we work with a legal definition of the CRC when it comes to children. So, every human under the age of 18 is considered a child. However, when we talk about young people, we work with a sociological definition. Youth is described as a period of transition from childhood to adulthood. It describes the years of growing up, of learning, developing, and moving from a state of relative dependence to a state of relative autonomy. The Council of Europe promotes participative and empowering youth policies, policies that facilitate mobility, social engagement, social inclusion, youth work and youth information, and most importantly, youth policies should support young people in their access to enjoy their human and social rights and their personal freedoms to the full. We want to empower young people to become active members in their society and to stand up for their own and for the others' rights. We want them to be self-confident and autonomous citizens with a critical mind and a commitment to the society. Youth policies and child protection policies are built on the same paradigm of values, most notably also when it comes to the human dignity of the person. However, in practical implementation, we do face a couple of compatibility problems. And I want to use one example For example, child protection policies do not make a difference between a child that is 7 or 17 years old. Youth policies must take into account the personal development and the growing into more and more responsibility to reach this autonomy. A child safeguarding policy, for example, for a project or an institution might suggest that an adult should not be alone with a child for a certain period of time or not at all under certain circumstances. For youth participation policies, this would mean that, for example, a 17-year-old and an 18 or 19-year-old working together in a community project should not be left alone. Many of our partners in the youth policy field find it increasingly difficult to bring together child protection objectives and educational and political objectives on empowerment, and plead for policies that are leveled and adapted to different age groups under 18. So one reason for this title of our new European Day on the protection of children against sexual exploitation and sexual abuse is therefore that we have chosen the subject of participation. Children and young people are all too often sidelined from matters that concerns them. So the 2019 edition of the European Day therefore will focus on empowering children to stop sexual violence. One of the best means to protect children and young people is in fact to empower them from a very early age to be critical and autonomous citizens. I would like to invite you to participate with your participation projects in our European Day on 18th, and often also I brought some material on that which is found in the back of the room. If we are serious in wanting to empower children and young people, and also young women in particular, to stop sexual violence, we have to provide them with a space for real participation, and that also means sharing power and taking power. In this sense, I wish you fruitful and participative discussions and deliberations and all success for the important work that you are doing all year long. Thank you.